The Hutchinson Homestead really represents the pioneering spirit of the homesteaders who were arriving here in the 1860s and 1870s, and it's a really incredible history here because it embodies homesteading and really early ranching history and high altitude ranching.
Everything that's here was hand built, hand dug, hand built, and it's still standing over 100 years later.
Because of the physical buildings themselves, you can touch them, you can smell them, you can go inside and just feel the mustiness or whatever it is that the human senses need.
Oh, wow.
I think the biggest change for me was seeing it transform from like a place that was ours to opening it up and welcoming people, which has been really cool.
It's a washboard. So you put it in the tub and you wash your clothes.
The Hutchinson Homestead and Learning Center is an authentic learning experience outside of the classroom in a real homestead.
It is deeply gratifying to see the magic and the learning that goes on out here.
I think it's a place that people can come and kind of step back into history and also see that it's a piece of history that's a living history.
This program was made possible by the History Colorado State Historical Fund,
supporting projects throughout the state to preserve, protect, and interpret Colorado's architectural and archaeological treasures. History Colorado State Historical Fund. Create the future, honor the past.
with additional funding provided in memory of Deanna E. LaCamera and members like you. With special thanks to the Denver Public Library, History Colorado, the Colorado Office of Film, Television, and Media, and to these organizations.
When we have it on here up high, because the cows will come up and stand in front of you and eat it. You can't go anywhere, so you have to get it above their reach. We're one of those rare long-term families that have managed to keep together a piece of ground in our great state of Colorado.
Ranching is the oldest industry in Colorado. The Indians owned the land originally, and then when the Ute Indians were moved out, the ranchers were allowed to come in. And the major reason the Indians were kicked out was that you had ranchers and miners and farmers who wanted that land, and they got it.
The gold rush of 1859 brought more than just a flood of miners to Colorado. It ushered in a stampede of cattle ranchers.
And then miners had to eat, and along came cattle. After the Civil War, a lot of people were migrating out west, and so between mining and cattle country, Colorado really took off.
The railroad would soon follow. But like mining, it would not always provide steady employment. Cattle ranching, on the other hand, has remained as steadfast in Colorado as the Rocky Mountains.
A lot of these cows are driven up into these mining camps. They had slaughterhouses, and that's where they slaughtered the cattle and sold the beef. And with that money, these ranchers were able to expand their homesteads, buy more land, get more irrigation.
This landscape would have been totally different then, with no roads, no train, no anything other than the way you got here, probably either by wagon or most likely just horseback. So these folks were true pioneers.
Cattle ranching is not for the faint of heart. The strenuous lifestyle has caused many ranches to change hands more frequently than the weather, except a certain ranch and homestead nestled in the crossroads of the Rockies.
It's really extraordinary in Colorado to have a working ranch that's still in the same family for 150 years.
The Hutchinson Ranch and Homestead is tucked between Salida and Poncha Springs. It is the oldest family-owned ranch in Colorado's Upper Arkansas River Valley.
What makes the Hutchinson Homestead different than some other historic buildings is this is still a ranch. This is still the same ranch that was here 150, 160 years ago. It's the same grass, the same cattle, the same family.
7 generations of Hutchinsons are still working the property. I don't think you can ask any more than that. It's very unique.
The founder of the homestead, Joseph Sykes Hutchinson, was born in England in 1837. His father moved the entire family to the land of opportunity when Joe was 11. But the move to America quickly turned tragic.
He had been one of 12 children. He and his sister were only 2 of which made through the typhoid epidemics back on the East Coast.
Orphaned on the American frontier, young Joe went to live with an uncle in Indiana. When the Civil War began in 1861, he enlisted and would rise to the rank of captain in the Indiana Infantry. After the war, Joe was lured west by the gold rush, determined to make a new life in the Rocky Mountains. But while looking for fortune, he found love.
Annabel McPherson came across the plains from Sparta, Wisconsin with her family.
She had been educated as a teacher, and there was a dance at a place called Dayton, which is now Twin Lakes. And at the dance, Joe showed up and she showed up, and as I say, people, the rest is history. Well, Joe and Annabel were married in 1868 in a little place called Helena, which would be today's Chaffee County.
The young couple put down roots before Colorado was even a state, or the town of Salida was founded. Joe and Annabel chose the wide open spaces of the area to carve out a life as Colorado cattle ranchers.
The oldest building on site was built in 1865 up in Cache Creek by Annabel's father, John McPherson. And then they dismantled it and brought it down here and rebuilt it.
Annabel had a stipulation that she wanted a house that had a stove in it instead of one of those open-air fireplaces.
And so the second property was built, the iconic house that still stands today.
Basically, it's a 2-story house with a wing on it. It is called Carpenter Gothic, and one of the most interesting things about it, it had an upstairs bedroom with a little balcony that came out to look over the South Arkansas River.
The main ranch house was built in 1873. And so after the family moved into the ranch house, what had been their first cabin became a granary. They kept oats and barley and grains there because it was really the most tightly constructed building on site, and so it was the most critter-proof and insect-proof.
To survive the remoteness of the high mountain plains, the Hutchinson Homestead had to become self-sufficient.
And if they didn't work, they didn't have it. I mean, it's sort of like, well, I'll do this wood because I know if I don't do the wood, I won't be warm. So that's what they did.
Homesteading and ranching is definitely not easy. It's extraordinary to me to think about what Annabelle's daily life might have been like back in 1870. At that time, the family had cows that open ranged across hundreds and hundreds of acres. And the management of a really large ranch is a constant daily task.
The height would have been in the early 1870s with about, we think, somewhere around 1,500 head. There was no national forest at the time, no fences, so the cows probably went where they want to.
The ranch was growing, and so was the Hutchinson family. 4 sons arrived: Art, Bailey, Harold, and Joe. With Annabelle's help running the ranch, Joseph Sr. was able to own and oversee 3 general merchandise stores, one in Cache Creek, one in what is now Poncha Springs, and one in Saguache called Hutchinson and Henson. Joseph was politically active and served in both the Colorado Territorial Legislature and subsequently the state legislature after statehood was obtained. Just as the family was truly settling in as high-altitude cattle ranchers, tragedy struck again. Joseph Sykes Hutchinson died from a brain tumor. He was just 42 years old.
That left these boys to be raised by, which I really consider the hero of the whole thing, Annabel. Because here's a single woman, not divorced, but widowed, in a place that barely has the railroad, probably not left with a lot of money.
Annabel ran the ranch by herself and raised 4 boys. I know that couldn't have been easy, cooking and cleaning for them. I have 1 child, and that's very challenging to run the ranch with her.
If I could go back in time and meet, it would be Annabel. To really get to hear her stories from when she was 12 and coming across the prairie in a covered wagon, to what it would have been like to try to run a ranch and raise kids and be a homesteader in 1868.
The elder 2 boys became the true ranchers here. They never married, and they were the ones that really did a lot of the work.
Annabel and Joseph's first son, his name was Art, and he, to me, seems like he must have been a bit of a character because he did help run the ranch. He lived his entire life here. There's a funny quote of his that says, "Every family deserves a gentleman, and I'm that gentleman."
My namesake, Uncle Art Hutchinson, he was a diary keeper and took pictures.
Uncle Art tells about Indians coming and sitting on their horse and looking at the house and then riding away. They didn't quite understand this new thing that was coming to the valley, this structure. And at the time it was a large structure because most people were living in basically 2-room houses at that time.
This would have been a major place for the Utes to come through and probably stop here at the house. And we have many stories, Uncle Art talking about Colorado and the bands pulling up to the house, and Colorado himself was a chief, and he would come in and eat.
By now, the Hutchinsons had established themselves. But ranching was not making them rich. To make ends meet, Annabel got creative.
She sold eggs and dressed out chickens and turkeys for people in town.
One journal entry that stands out as being pretty humorous, really, is it took place on Christmas Eve, 1914. And I guess, according to Uncle Art, the turkeys were out and they were sleeping on the fence. And a coyote came in the middle of the night and stole these turkeys off the fence and dragged them off and ate them. Meanwhile, their 3 dogs were asleep under the bed in the cabin and never heard anything. And so on Christmas Eve, they lost their turkeys to coyotes. Meanwhile, their ranch dogs slept through the whole experience.
Annabel's sons, Art and Bailey, were naturals at ranching.
Bailey was a historian, and he wrote ledgers and he kept records of everything.
Joe would eventually become county sheriff. Harold philandered his family onto the other side of the law.
Harold married a lady by the name of Gracie Green. Harold, working for the railroad, would come back from the route, the main line route down into Pueblo, and on his way home started stopping at another house.
Grace came to town one time and saw him, Harold, and Mrs. Baudet walking down the street arm in arm, and they went into this barn.
Grace came to her door with a pistol and said, "You are basically messing around with my husband and I don't like it," and shot her and killed her. It must have been a major story of the time. Gracie was acquitted because she was protecting her home by a jury. So she did not serve any time other than probably a little bit.
Harold was the bad boy because of it, you know, and he got kind of kicked out of the family.
Harold moved to Pueblo and got remarried. His only son, Mills, stayed behind to work on the ever-expanding ranch. In 1916, Annabel bought the adjoining property. Fortunately, a stranger showed up to help with the added workload.
Old Dad Stinson was a fellow that basically appeared on the ranch at one time.
So they went over and investigated, and here was a man sound asleep next to the fire, and they woke him up and took him into the homestead, into the house, and fed him, and he never left.
And somehow or another he had a personality that got along with the two boys, and they brought him in, and he lived with them until he died. In fact, they helped bury him up in the Poncha Cemetery.
Later in 1916, Annabel was also laid to rest. It was now Uncle Art's turn to run the ranch, but not from his parents' house.
Uncle Art, he's a cabin there that we know he built after he wanted to move out of the big house.
Art didn't like the main house. It was too crowded for him.
And he put a roof on it and he put hay on it. It was his cabin.
I think he did drink quite a bit. He had a bottle up, they call it 101 Hill.
And he kept a bottle of whiskey under a rock up there, and I guess at lunch you'd sit down and you have to go all day, so whether it was 101 proof or 101 brand whiskey, I don't know, but we've always called it 101 Hill.
Art was not the only one who wanted his own place on the growing homestead. Joe and Annabel's grandson, Mills, got married and built a house right next door to the main house.
My grandfather decided, I think about the time they got married, that he needed a house that was separate from the big house. So Mills grew up on the place and really became kind of the romantic view of a cowboy. He wore the big 10-gallon hat and was apparently a really good roper, and he liked to ride bucking horses.
By the mid-1930s, cowboys and ranchers were faced with a changing landscape. Hutchinson cattle now had to confront fences, grazing rules, and roads. So did the Hutchinson ranchers.
The worst thing that happened to the ranch the whole time was when they put Highway 50 in right here. They split the ranch in half.
It was a dirt road, and as traffic got more, you know, with Model Ts and A's going up the road and Packards and other things, the dust would get bad on the dirt road. And so Mills would take this irrigation ditch and turn it out in the middle of the highways. And they said these guys would go by just cursing Mills, because they were getting mud all over their car.
Mills and his wife would have 3 sons, Wendell, Jake, and Joseph.
When I was a boy growing up, things were a lot different on the farm. Everything was horse-drawn. We didn't have tractors. I remember my first experience as a little boy with that was going out in the field and see my dad and get on the machine, sit in his lap.
It was Wendell and his wife Sue who would eventually take the reins of running the ranch. but not immediately.
Uncle Art told him, he says, you know, Wendell, you need to go out and get some more education. And he did, and did well. He had decided that he would let the younger boys have the first crack at the ranch. And Jake started it.
Wendell's love of animals led him to study veterinary medicine.
I graduated then in 1949, the same year I buried my sweetheart Sue Swallow.
He left Salida to take over a vet practice in Gunnison in the early 1950s. But eventually, he received a plea from his brother.
Jake came over one day and said, I'm tired of trying to irrigate. You keep the ranch going. Would you and Sue want to come over and take over? So I said, I think we would. And then my wife especially wanted to do that because she was a native here too. She wanted to come back. Our first son, about 2 years after we got married, was Art. Andy is the second son. The next child we had was Lisa. Now Art has Aaron and Abby. I'll say there's some things that have not changed so much.
We still do a lot of the traditional ways. Calves are born traditionally February, March. Branding, it's the only legal way of having livestock, cattle registered in Colorado. The Colorado Brand Board regulates that. Our brands go back to the turn of the century and before. So we still use that. We do that every spring, typically in May.
The ranching lifestyle, the only way I can describe it is you're on 100%, 365 days a year.
Yeah, 100 more.
Tried to be done pretty much in April so that they're big enough to go out on the range and, be with their mom and walk distances. So we're still traditional in keeping the seasonality going. Typically in Colorado, we have the monsoon season that hits somewhere after 4th of July, 10th or 12th, and that's usually what kind of regulates the second crop of hay that comes in.
I mean, ranchers bail after the third generation. They're like, I'm done with this. You know, it's hard work. Everybody since the second generation had to take second jobs in order to stay ranching.
Land rich and cash poor is often the way cattle ranchers describe their lives. Hard work and long hours never deterred the Hutchinson family, especially Doc. In the early 1950s, he ran the ranch and his veterinary practice.
He became he is a legend here because he was the kind of guy who didn't charge much. He wrote off a lot of, they just can't afford it, but the animal was sick. I can remember Christmas days when, you know, you're sitting down to eat and all of a sudden somebody's bringing in a, you know, sick calf, and he gets up and goes.
Through the years, the chores never changed. Just as in 1868, when the Hutchinson Ranch started, life revolved around birthing, branding, and raising cows. From one season to the next.
Our cows are very special. They go back to the 1880s when they were shorthorn basic breeds, and then it became more Hereford, and then now we're more of a Red Angus, but the basics are still there.
As the family continued to focus on the hard work of ranching, they eventually moved into newer and bigger homes, and the homestead sat vacant, with time and the elements taking their toll. All the while, Wendell felt that the original buildings should be saved for future generations.
So the Hutchinson Homestead used to be kind of falling down. Lots of old junk, lots of old equipment lying around.
It was basically settling into the ground. The roof was starting to sag.
These buildings were always home. Even though we lived a quarter of a mile up the road, you'd come down here, and of course your grandmother lived here, the apple trees were here. I loved the blacksmith shop.
I would have to say my favorite building of all the buildings that's been restored is the saddle house. We spent so much time in there when we were younger, going in and out for halters and saddles. I love the smell of it in there.
I think Uncle Art's cabin is my favorite just because it's one room, it's small, it's very efficient, and it's comfortable, it's homey.
In the 1960s and 70s, survival of the ranch remained in peril, but Wendell continued to turn down countless offers to sell it to make way for subdivisions or a golf course.
Wendell's vision was to preserve it so that future generations could see what life was like in those bygone days.
He wanted it to be open to the public. He wanted it to be preserved, and he wanted it to tell the story of our ranching heritage, high altitude ranching heritage here in Salida.
Back in 2003, the site was named as one of Colorado's most endangered places through the Colorado Preservation, Inc. program. And then in 2006, the Hutchinson family chose to donate the historic site, so that 2.5 acres with all the old buildings, to the town of Poncha Springs. And then the town partnered at that time with a nonprofit organization called Salida Area Parks, Open Space, and Trails. And so it was because of that partnership and because of that donation that all of the preservation work was able to be done. Almost $1 million was raised, mostly through the State Historical Fund and through National Park Service Save America's Treasures grant, to do 3 phases of preservation work.
This is called a Gothic style house. Well, of course, the building was on the most endangered places list. That was for a reason. Because of roof decay, much of the interior finishes had already collapsed. There was no floor, and the building was literally rotting into the ground. A good winter snowstorm would have taken it down. All of the porches had rotted and sunk down. Although Doc Hutch had put a new roof on it, that roof was 30 years old and deteriorated. We lifted the entire original building up and had to move it out so that it projected out over the highway in order for us to put a new foundation underneath it. Joseph Hutchinson signed a wall inside of this building in 1898. Much of the exterior trim had deteriorated. Originally, this door was supposed to be replaced as part of our preservation. I was fortunate enough to get a woodworker who actually took apart the original door, replaced broken panels, and saved all the original hardware. The unique thing about this hardware is, if you'll look in the key slot right below it, there's a screw, and then there is a square nail. The carpenter that put this on obviously dropped the screw that was supposed to go in to this doorknob on the ground. And to replace the screw back then was a 60-mile trip to Canyon City. So he put a square nail in it, and 137 years later, his nail is still allowing this lock to work.
One of the absolute most amazing artifacts that we have here at the homestead is a melodeon, which is a pump organ. And it was Annabel's mother's melodeon, and it came across the prairie in a covered wagon in 1860 when the McPherson family came from Wisconsin to Colorado. And Annabel's mother, Helen McPherson, brought this melodeon with her, and we still have it here today.
And for the longest time, when we first started, this was stored over at Hutch's. We didn't see it till probably the second or third phase, but we'd always heard stories about it. It is so neat that we see it now. They've gotten the legs fixed, and so this is the first time I've been back here and saw that it's actually standing here.
The melodeon is a pump organ, basically, not quite so sophisticated. It doesn't work currently, but plans are in the works to hopefully get it restored and allow us to hear the beautiful music that Annabel probably played on it. So now we can go back in Annabel's bedroom, the main bedroom. The building was full of surprises. This is a Grit magazine. It's a story section, and it's from 1928. We did find material dating from the 1880s in the building throughout the process.
This is Annabel's bedroom, and obviously her and Joseph slept upstairs. He died very early on in their marriage. In fact, all the boys were 11 and under when he died. And so then this became her room, and even in the diaries they talk about this being Annabel's room. And so that's the room we're in.
The unique thing about this room is when we took up this original flooring, we got to the last board that would have been put down by the carpenters at that time. And they put an 1872 nickel underneath their flooring. We actually put that nickel back in the floor because that's good luck from the carpenters. We also put in a 2013 nickel from our work. It is the only room in the building that we were actually able to save the original flooring. All of the wallpaper on this wall is original. The borders are original until we get down to the back wall.
Restoration projects don't normally start with a beekeeper, but this one did.
The inside of the walls, I mean, there were bees kind of, floating around because there were these big beehives hiding behind the walls. So we knew, ooh, this is something we have to deal with.
All of these walls on the west side of the house, both stories had bees in them.
Before we started anything, we had to deal with the bees that had lived here for, even since Uncle Art wrote in his diary.
In Art's diaries, where he talks about hanging wallpaper in an upstairs bedroom, and he got stung 3 times. and so he quit hanging wallpaper till the next day.
We had a professional come from Dallas, Texas. What he did was take a sensor, a heat sensor, and he ran it across the wall, and wherever it was the hottest, that was where the queen bee was. Here's all the bees flying around here because they're being disturbed, and they've got smoke going everywhere to keep them calm, and we're carefully taken off board by board because we're trying to get to the queen bee.
We got approximately 5 pounds of honey out of the beehives.
And we saved the honey, and we sold it out here. We, jarred it and sold it. In addition, there was a tree growing out of the north wall of the old homestead building.
Primarily, it had grown inside the walls of the building, and it was definitely a challenge to get it out. Took us some thinking, but we got it out, and everything came out good.
Uncle Art's journal provided a window into the past, which allowed the restoration team to faithfully reproduce paint colors and wallpaper.
Reproduction wallpaper was one of the biggest things because we had to find somebody in the United States, hopefully, who had hung muslin.
We did save one wall of the last wallpaper that was put on. We had an expert from Tennessee who knew how to hang wallpaper on muslin. Really, it's a proper method to do it over wood. We're standing in the original kitchen area of the homestead. This is the original wallpaper. We did put up protective glass so people couldn't touch it, but we were able to get samples and sent them off to match what was original. If you look up, you can tell how much they lived in here. You'll notice the original paint was a very bright paint. We left uncleaned portions of the ceiling up just to show what it looked like when we started the project. The original house actually stopped right where this door opening is. In 1898, they added this kitchen portion on.
There was one year that a laborer came through and wanted a job and lived in the old house, and this guy painted the kitchen blue to keep the evil spirits away because he was afraid the house was, I think, haunted or something.
During construction, after we heard this story, when, we'd get in bad mood, somebody'd get in a bad mood, and it's like, go stand in the kitchen. You just need to go to the kitchen, get your attitude cleared up, and then come back to work.
In this area, this was the master bedroom when Joseph and Annabel lived here. Roof leaks had actually caused all of the ceilings and all of the wallpaper on the side walls to collapse. We were, again, able to save enough to match the original wallpaper patterns. And you can see, again, in other areas, so that we could tell the story of the building, we left original wallpaper and the wood so that you could kind of go back through time and not necessarily see a brand new wallpapered building. The second bedroom, the smaller bedroom, was apparently Art's bedroom. It's one of the few rooms that we were actually able to save the original linoleum, so it's quite fragile. Luckily for us, the Hutchinsons had documented plantings, so we were able to replant several of the native trees. We also were able to take cuttings from some of the original apple trees.
A lot of the logs for these later cabins were actually cottonwood logs, which came from down here on the river.
We couldn't just go to the lumber store and buy cottonwood logs. So we actually got permission from the Hutchinsons and went out on their property and harvested cottonwood logs to replace the bottom portion.
The restoration work spanned 10 years and covered more than 10 buildings.
There's the ranch house, saddle house, granary, Uncle Art's cabin, blacksmith shop, a milking barn, draft horse barn, chicken coop, loafing shed, equipment shed, and the privy, if you consider the outhouse, one of the buildings.
So we finished in 2013 with the visitor center. That was our last piece. And Hutch was still doing okay. I believe that was the last year of his life, but we did a grand opening. He came, he knew exactly what we were doing. He was honored and celebrated, and his kids were here. I think Art and Andy were both here.
Wendell Doc Hutchinson died September 20th, 2014, just 5 days shy of his 90th birthday. But he kept his family's legacy alive and inspired others to see the importance of this place.
And then in 2015, the baton got officially passed from Spot to Guidestone, and now Guidestone, Colorado, is the nonprofit organization that partners with the town of Poncha Springs and the Hutchinson family to really oversee all the operations and management of the site and development of all the programs and opportunities here.
This cut wood from Canyon City by wagon. Can you imagine that? It takes about an hour now by car. Can you imagine?
So today, the Hutchinson Homestead and Learning Center is a place where we really aim to bring the history of Colorado and agriculture to life through education programs and tours and community events. At our Pioneer Camp, some of the activities that the children get to do include things like making homemade beeswax candles, soap making, an old-fashioned laundry, which is one of their favorites, which is always makes me laugh because most children today have no interest in helping their parents do the laundry, right? But you give them a wash tub and a washboard and a wringer, and they're so excited, and they can sit and do laundry for hours.
Let's see what's happening after.
Dogs can't have ice cream. I feel bad for them.
Is he a freestyle salt? Yeah. It doesn't have time to be creative.
Well, I had a little chicken and it wouldn't lay an egg, so I poured hot water up and down its leg. Oh, the little chicken cried and the little chicken begged, and the little chicken laid me a hard-boiled egg. Turkey in the straw, ha ha ha. Turkey in the hay, hay hay hay. Stir it up, shake it up, any way at all. Play a little tune.
animals actually would you be raising as a pioneer that might be really important to have as part of your homestead?
I'm a third grade teacher at Longfellow Elementary in Salida, and we bring them to the Hutchinson Homestead to give them a first-hand account of what it was like to be a pioneer who homesteaded part of this valley.
This activity is Packing the Wagon Challenge, and what we are doing is there's things you'd pack in the wagon over here, and you'd try to pack it in straw bales. We've had wagons so we can tell Grandpa. No, we're not. No, Grandpa needs to work. The plunger. They used to have to build their own barn, house, and a lot of other stuff, and they had to feed animals.
One of the children's favorite places on the homestead is the tunnel that was once used to move cattle from one side of Highway 50 to the other. It's magical and leads to acres of open space to run free.
I feel kind of connected because there's a lot of old stuff here that was used back then, like old horseshoes and axes and stuff, shovels and all that kinds of stuff that we use at the ranch. I like how they built their own houses.
One of the other neat things that we have as part of our interpretive materials here at the homestead are called passports. We have 17 different passports, and each passport represents a different individual who has lived or worked here over the course of that time frame. And on one side of the passport is a picture of that person and their name. And on the opposite side is the generation of the family. So you can learn a little bit more, and some of the kind of more personalized stories can come out in those passports.
I'm the 6th generation of the Hutchinson family. Annabel McPherson is my great-great-great-great-grandmother. Today's lifestyle, the cost of living, you have to kind of have supplemental income. People are coming for weddings and people are coming for corporate retreats, and they love our ranch. They love the barn, and obviously that makes me money, but ranching is not super lucrative. The lifestyle is not for everybody. There's really a lot of times that it's stressful. It's a lot of work, but then the next day something beautiful happens. You have healthy, wonderful baby calves running around and the sun's shining, and it makes it all worth it. The best part about the ranching lifestyle is the seasons. You always are looking forward to the next one. It's so great to see the cows load up on the semis and go out on green pasture. And then it's so great when you get to spend all summer riding and chasing them around, and they're not here at the ranch, and it's a nice break. And then it's just feels like a weight is lifted when they finally all come home and you can see them on your fields and drive out there and see them. Without the cycle of life and the seasons, I don't know like if I would do it. We still do things very similar. They summered up on our Marshall Pass lease, which is just in the mountains here west of Salida. So they push the cattle up from the ranch on horseback. We still do that every June 15th. We start them down in Poncha Springs, and it's about a 10-mile push up the hill, and then they summer in the exact same area that the cattle summered back when Annabel was running the place. She had to figure out when to sell them, when to take them to market, deal with price changes, deal with years of too much snow and years of, not enough irrigation, drought years. It's very similar, I would have to say, like our lifestyles, just kind of being a steward of the land, taking care of the grass and, taking care of the cattle who are, the ones that pay the bills, and that's why we're here. The cows make the ranch totally worthwhile. I mean, ultimately we are just grass farmers because our job is to keep the fields green and to raise hay. The cows are the reason I'm here, for sure. They're my passion. I know each one of them, and hard to sell them when they're good cows that get old. Easy to sell the ones that are bad mothers and, break fences and stuff. But in 2014, Brian and I had a little girl named Avon. So she's now 4 years old, and she is the 7th generation now at the Hutchinson Ranch. She's adorable. She loves going out on the ranch with me, but she doesn't always choose it yet. But when she's at school or when she's with other family members, she brags about it. She says, "Mommy's a rancher. Maybe I'll be," her goal now is to either be an electrician like her daddy, Brian, or a rancher like Mommy, or actually a dentist, which I'm like, maybe you should go with the dentist, but I'm just kidding.
The Hutchinson Homestead and all the other great ranches we
should go with the dentist, but
are very important, I think, because of the folk spirit of a people. That you know a lot about the people because of their language and their customs and their traditions and their art and their music, and the ranchers are Colorado.
This is so important to have this here for people to come to and understand high altitude ranching areas. It's just huge, and they're disappearing so fast.
Our ranching is still changing. It's getting harder and harder to make a living ranching.
It takes money to operate a ranch. You have to clean the ditches, you have to maintain the fields.
Without public grazing, we couldn't be ranchers. If people want to see ranching continue, I think they need to be aware of that.
The landscape has changed. More people are moving in for various reasons, recreation being one, nice climate. The Colorado experience is changing. And the question is now, how do we adapt to that? We put most of the ranch here, our part here, into a conservation easement.
They have preserved open space in perpetuity that creates a buffer between Salida and Poncha Springs, but also is a treasure, a wildlife corridor.
It's still protecting kind of the open space between two growing towns.
If the ranchers can't be here, you're going to lose your green open space. You're going to lose the history of Chaffee County. It's really important to work with your ranchers.
The legacy is the fact that it's a material, visual reference to the past. This is an important legacy this community wants to keep. And we're glad to be the family that supports that.
To start a homestead, you need to stake your claim. Let's go!
By preserving the buildings, we are preserving the stories, and that's the key part. The buildings allow us to continue to tell these stories for generations to come.
Being at the crossroads of the Rockies, it's a place that probably continue to get more visits and more significance as time goes on. After I pass away and my granddaughter's hopefully running the place, it'll be seen as a much more valuable piece of Colorado history that people had the foresight to preserve and honor.
Back in the saddle again. Out where a friend is a friend.